Alright, Simon Scark 11 with an updated edition of fixing Tactician and debuffs in general in Xenoblade 3, which by extension would also fix Machine Assassin without really making any other changes to it. So before we get to Tactician, we gotta talk about why debuffs are really so bad and how to fix them. So if you only care about the debuffs, I'll be covering that first. So the main reason debuffs are so bad, of course, is how hard it is to apply them. But there's actually multiple reasons for why it's so hard to apply them. The first is they all have a base proc rate less than 100%. There's a few exceptions, like the damage over time debuffs, I believe. But for the most part, they're all less than guaranteed to work even if they land. Then you have enemy debuff resistance, which is subtracted from the base proc rate. And enemy debuff resistance is usually so high that you have a base proc rate of nearly 0. Enemies have two debuff resistances, Ether debuff resist and physical debuff resist. I'm not going to go over all the debuffs for which is which, but it's basically about half of each one. So for most of the game, enemies will have one really high debuff resist that makes them practically immune to half of debuffs, and then the other half is a coin flip. By late game, debuff resistances are all so high that they're basically just immune to everything. There is the effects that increase debuff success rate, which apply after debuff resistance, subtracting from the base proc rate. But since you're basically starting from 0, most of those effects are pretty useless. So the second issue is resistance down, which is supposed to make it easier to apply debuffs, is a resistible debuff. Why, Monolith? I don't think this is how it worked in X. I'm pretty sure it did not work that way in X. So I just don't see the reason for this. Doesn't make any sense. And then the last, less important but still somewhat annoying reason, doesn't really affect much in the current state, but in terms of fixing them, you would want to change this. Unlike buffs, which cannot be overridden by weaker versions of the buff, debuffs can be overridden by a weaker version of the same debuff. So now that we've established what the actual problems with debuffs are, how to fix them. First off, resistance down, make it not resistible. Reduce all works interestingly more like a buff, where it's just hard-coded to always work. So I would make resistance down work the same way as that. So it just bypasses debuff resistance, completely ignores them, doesn't account for them at all in the first place. Then the second thing is the base proc chance should just be 100% on all debuffs. There's no reason for the proc chance to exist at all. They should just work automatically. And then the biggest change, this one honestly would work even without the other two changes. Just by itself, this alone would fix debuffs. And it also would fix the value of Daze and Burst. Add an effect to Daze that when hitting a dazed enemy, they will have debuff resistance removed entirely, just like they have all of their evasion removed. You get guaranteed hits on dazed enemies, make it so that you would get guaranteed debuffs on dazed enemies. And I guess the effect could also apply on Burst for however long that rage quelling effects work on that. I'm not sure how long that lasts, but have the debuff resistance removal go along with the rage quelling. So that alone, I feel, would be enough to just fix debuffs, even without the other changes I mentioned. Just the change to Daze would completely fix Daze and debuffs. So then, now that we've fixed debuffs, we'll talk about how to fix Tactician. Tactician's issues are that it's all over the place, and it's both debuff and evasion focused without really having anything to work for either of those. The first one is a small change. Overall, it would already work good for having Ether defense down that can actually work, but just as a little bonus, I'd want to make this multi-hit so that it has multiple chances to apply Ether defense down. Nothing too big, just it would be a nice little bonus. Maybe the same thing for Avenging Eagle and Dark Banner. I'm not sure if those are multi-hits or not. I never use them. Then Hazy Figure. So evasion up, this isn't even a good effect in the early game. It barely even works in the early game when you would want to be using Tactician, when you're forced to use Tactician. So I would change this to a decoy field. So I'm not sure the exact number of how many decoys would be worthwhile for it. At least one, because you obviously want to have it do something. I feel like 2 would probably be a good sweet spot. It's enough where, since you'd be spamming it, early game you wouldn't be spamming it, so it would be balanced there, but late game when you can spam it, just dodging 2 hits for among the whole party isn't really amazing, but it's useful enough. You could maybe make it 3 hits, 3 uses of decoy, since by late game you're probably going to be dealing with a lot of multi-hits, and it would be used up per party member. I mean, you'd be used up per, just, instead of per party member, just as the whole party. So anyone getting hit in it would use up the uses of decoy. So either 2 or 3 uses of decoy for Hazy Figure Field. And then for Tidal Wave. So since we fixed debuff resistance down, I would add that effect to this. Tidal Wave is a really sad talent art. It doesn't have any kind of synergy with anything. It doesn't even have a useful effect. It's just a weaker version of Technical Heal, I think. So I would just, actually no, I think this one's damaging. I think Technical Heal is not damaging. I don't know. I'm not sure. But either way, this is a pretty useless thing. So I would just reduce the damage ratio on it and give it debuff resistance down. Maybe also give it bind, because that one is a pretty useful debuff. Then onto Tactician skills. This one's just sad. This is pretty absolutely worthless because I don't think ether attacks can be blocked in the first place, so this just does nothing when you're an ether attacker. So I have 2 ideas for fixing its skills. The first one is to replace this with an effect where when applying a debuff on an enemy, heals the party. It could either be heals based off of your healing power, or it could be percentage based like the Signifer skill for applying buffs. I feel like it would be pretty decent to make it work like the Signifer skill, so you have the debuff version and then the buff version. So this be, I think it's 3% HP, covers 3% HP to the party whenever you apply a debuff. Since you'd be applying debuffs fairly frequently as a Tactician with these changes, it would be a decent supplemental healing and really nice in the early game. Like, we're not trying to make Tactician post-game viable, maybe usable, but most of these changes would also really help it in the early game. And then this, so either increase the effectiveness to at least 15% so it's a bit more useful. Alternatively, make it, when debuffing an enemy, applies decoy. 1 use of decoy, so every time you apply a debuff, you get to evade 1 attack guaranteed. This would help with survivability, so you can help heal everyone and stay alive to just take care of everybody else. Wouldn't be that strong if it's only a single use of decoy, but it would be decent for keeping you alive so that you can actually help out. So then I also have one other possibility. My personal preference for this would be to combine Machine Assassin and Tactician, since we're already giving it debuff resistance down, which is the main thing you'd really want from arts, at least. Give it Chaos Chain. This one is what would be the best skill on Machine Assassin when debuffs are made to work. So personally, I just like it if Machine Assassin and Tactician were combined into one debuff-focused support class, and you had Chaos Chain on Tactician. Also, fun fact, Chaos Chain does not proc the additive on Tyrant Cross's or Viral Vector's random debuff application. It just doesn't do anything for this. Who knows why? But yeah, personally, I just like to see them combined. But since Machine Assassin's already fixed on its own, you wouldn't really need to do that. Just what I would prefer to see. Anyway, if you watched the end, comment Blossom Dance down below, and see you next time.